Good afternoon, distinguished members and colleagues. My name is Titus Kilonzo, and I serve as the CEO, Environment Institute of Kenya. Members, on behalf of the Environment Institute of Kenya, I warmly welcome you to this timely and important webinar on the Kenya National Carbon Registry. EIK is a professional body, and we are committed to advancing environmental stewardship, ethical governance, and professional excellence. We bring together practitioners across disciplines to strengthen standards, promote informed policy engagement, and build capacity in areas that define the future of environmental management in our country and beyond. Members, conversations such as this one are central to our mandate as EIK, and today is particularly significant. As you all know, earlier last week, the Kenya National Carbon Registry was officially launched in Nairobi, which marked a major milestone in Kenya's climate governance journey, a launch that was very successful, which was followed by a successful system development, rigorous testing, institutional validation, and structured engagement with the stakeholders, including targeted capacity building with the designated national authority. This was an event that brought together national leadership and international partners, underscoring the importance of this platform within Kenya's broader climate and development agenda. As environmental professionals, our responsibility now is clear. We must understand how this system works, how it is governed, what compliance obligations arise, and where opportunities exist for projects, financing, and community benefit. And this afternoon's session is therefore strategic. I want to assure you that it positions us to engage with credibility, competence, and integrity in Kenya's evolving carbon market ecosystem. Colleagues, with that context, we now turn to our facilitator, who is going to guide us through the structure, the functionality, and the opportunities within the Kenya National Carbon Registry. Facilitator is Mr. Charles Waweru, who is the Director of Carbon Project Development at Vast Carbon, where he leads the end-to-end design, structuring, and implementation of carbon credit projects across Africa. He brings deep expertise in Article 6 of the Paris Agreement, digital monitoring, reporting and verification innovation, and climate financing structuring. Charles has also co-developed and delivered a series of carbon market training sessions, equipping African practitioners with the tools to design high-integrity carbon projects that meet the required global standards. Karibu sana, Mr. Waweru, to guide us through today's session.
Thanks for the introduction, Mr. Kilonzo. I trust you can all also see my screen. I'll try to make every effort to be very systematic in today's presentation. I think I've already heard about what I do as Charles, and I do it as Vast Carbon. And within the context of Kenya's National Carbon Registry, we were glad to have been selected by GIZ on behalf of the government of Kenya to support them in the technical design of the carbon registry. And it's something I'm going to be showcasing here because it's now an open platform that anyone who has an interest in the carbon market ecosystem can definitely be able to come into the platform or the website and proceed. However, I also took note of the fact that the platform is primarily designed for, in principle, any member of the public. However, in terms of account creation and using it for product development, you should be somebody who has got some good understanding of the carbon market ecosystem, because that's how the platform has been developed. And more importantly, the platform has also been developed with respect to the carbon registry. That said, I'll be showcasing a video of just a quick video tutorial, and then go and show you the platform as well. But for more importantly, I'll also take a step back and just quickly cover some other areas as requested, which is, for example, how do we go about the registration, tracking, and verification of carbon credits? Also, how do we how does one make sure they're in compliance with Kenya's climate change frameworks? Therefore, we shall be having a small section of looking at the principal regulation, which is the Carbon Markets Regulation 2024. And then we shall be looking at some of the opportunities within carbon projects, financing, and community benefits. And then, of course, happy to respond to any questions that may be coming from the audience. That said, before you look at the carbon registry, Kenya's National Carbon Registry, we must understand what has been the basis of us to even start to talk about carbon markets in the first place. Now, those of us who are around might remember that sometime in the early 90s, a number of scientists started to publish a number of articles and publications warning the planet, warning the global community that if you don't stop doing some of the things you're currently doing, then there'll be a lot of increase in global surface temperatures, and therefore there was need for corrective action taken. Now, what then happened was that certain political leaders, for example, those of you remember Al Gore, the former vice president in the US, even did a documentary just saying how things are so bad, and the things being so bad in terms of global temperatures is largely on account of human activities, or if you like, anthropogenic activities. Now, the main issue here was that there's an increase in surface temperature, and therefore for us to try and reverse that trend, it will be very important for us to make sure we undertake certain activities that are either going to be reducing or removing this so-called components that's making us feel the temperatures of the world is increasing. Now, the question then is, what is it exactly within the atmosphere that is making surface temperatures increase? I'll explain this by way of examples. I'll take an urban-based example. One example, the urban areas is a sauna. For those of us who have been able to go into a sauna, you'll notice that when you go inside a sauna and you close the door behind you, you're able to make sure you are getting the heat effect of a sauna. You can adjust the temperature to become hotter, etc. However, you'll also notice that were you to leave the door open to the sauna, then all the heat will go away and the sauna will no longer be having its heat or warming feature. Now, example from the rural area will be, if you ever walked into a livestock shed, you'll notice that you're outside the livestock shed and then you walk into the livestock shed, you notice that two things. One, there'll be a particular smell, but more importantly, it's slightly warmer inside a livestock shed, be it for cattle, pigs or goats, whatever it is, compared to the outside. Now, the reason why it's warm inside a sauna is because of a particular gas we know as steam, or if you like, water vapor. And in the case of a livestock shed, one of the gases that's making it feel warm is called the methane gas, which is coming from the livestock dung. And as the dung is staying there, it's starting to emit the methane. Gases that are known to be trapping heat, either at a household level or a farm level, they're known as the greenhouse gases. But now imagine if these gases are being emitted at a global or planetary level and they remain there in the atmosphere. What happens is, if all this methane coming from different livestock farms, all this carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide coming from all these different industries, and they remain trapped within the atmosphere for far too long before they are removed or reduced, then it creates this increased warming phenomenon at the global level. And therefore, what we try to do within the carbon markets is to offer one of many different instruments within which persons, entities, or organizations that are keen to combat climate change by way of developing projects that are removing or reducing these greenhouse gases and receive a sort of financial benefit. That's what is the basis behind carbon markets. Developing a project that is either reducing or removing these greenhouse gases and sell off this activity by way of the commodities to somebody else, and of course get a financial return. That is really the carbon market. So the different ways within which we can try to reduce global warming by way of reducing some of these greenhouse gases that are coming from human activities. But one such way is the carbon market ecosystem. And how the transaction goes is very simple. It's whereby for every 1 ton of greenhouse gases that you have been able to remove, you have actually gained 1 carbon credits. Now, because we are doing this project, there are ways within which we must, of course, be able to measure it because if I'm to sell carbon credits, it's literally you're saying I'm selling air. Technically, yes, no, but we shall be looking at the methodologies that are used to do this assessment. But what's very important for us to know is that carbon market, the basis of carbon markets, is to provide a financial scheme within which persons or entities that are engaged in the activity of reducing or removing greenhouse gases from the atmosphere are able to get some sort of reward or benefit from that particular engagement. And for every 1 ton of greenhouse gases that you remove, we say you have been able to remove or reduce 1 carbon credit. Then when you're coming to sell this activity, you're not selling the tons of CO2e, you're not selling the tons of greenhouse gases, but what you're really selling are the carbon credits, because now that which you have removed or reduced from the atmosphere, that is the greenhouse gases, will be transacted as a sort of commodity. And therefore, we talk about carbon credits as the thing that you're going to be selling. The project that is doing the reduction or removing, we call it the carbon offset project. Offset because when you, as a Kenyan, for example, you are doing a mitigation activities such as clean cooking or planting trees, you are doing it so as you can sell those benefits to somebody else from most likely the what you call the global north. So when you're selling it to them, you're not selling the greenhouse gases, but you're selling the carbon credits, because 1 carbon credit is representing 1 ton of greenhouse gases. Last key point is that also you can remove quite a number of gases. We're calling them greenhouse gases. There's methane, there's carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide, there's the nitrous oxide. Again, I'm sure you as environmental practitioners, you ever come across businesses or projects dealing with these different kind of gases. Now, because these different gases have got different physical properties, it's important that all gases that are being used within this ecosystem have a common point of reference, and that point of reference is what you call carbon dioxide equivalent. Now, because CO2 is the most abundant of these gases, if you remove, for example, 1 kilogram of methane from the atmosphere, you must express it as what you call CO2e. You'll be seeing a lot of this in the regulations or even in some of the richer carbon dioxide equivalents. Now, we need to convert the 1 kilogram of methane into CO2e. How we do it is by what we call global warming potential, which is simply, in very simple terms, how does methane compare to carbon dioxide with respect to the heat retention capacity, in a very, very simple term. So the comparison is by 29. That means methane can trap CO2. So methane can trap heat 29 times more effectively than carbon dioxide. So if you have removed 1 kilogram of methane, essentially you have been able to remove 29 kilograms of CO2e. Okay, so all this data, of course, this is what you call the default values, are available within what you call IPCC, that is the Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change. This whole website with all these different values and whatnot. The last important thing that we also need to ask ourselves is for somebody, let's say a company in Germany, to come to Africa and buy these so-called carbon credits, what is it that has necessitated them to buy it? So how it happens is, like in any market, because a carbon market is also a market, there must be demand and supply. The carbon offset projects is basically the supply side. So what about the demand side? I'm sure some of you have been contracted by some of the companies within Kenya, for example, to do what you call the scope 1, scope 2, scope 3 emissions calculation. Yeah. So for most of these companies in the global north, their respective environmental regulator, like NEMA to them, has provided them regulation that says for every emission from your companies, for example, you must make sure you offset it. So when they do their scope 1, 2, 3 calculation, they're able to know, oh, we as so and so in Germany have been able to emit, let's say, 2 million tons of greenhouse gases, and our regulator requires us to offset every single ton. So remember, if you've got 2 million, if you need to offset 2 million tons of greenhouse gases or 2 million TCO2e, then you also need to buy simply 2 million carbon credits, because 1 ton of CO2e is equivalent to 1 carbon credit. So if I am a manufacturer in Germany, I want to offset 2 million tons of greenhouse gases that I emitted, I simply have to come and buy 2 million carbon credits. So the image you're seeing on the screen, on the left-hand side is showing the demand. The demand is a result of the computation of the emissions of a company, scope 1, 2, 3. And on the right side is now the carbon credit marketplace, whereby you look for an offset project. It could be a forestry, renewable energy, carbon, agriculture. There's so many of them. We'll talk about them later. So you go to such projects and tell them, hey, I want to offset 2 million tons of greenhouse gases. So therefore, do you have 2 million carbon credits available? And I'll show you where all these numbers are existing within the global stage. There is literally an A to Z list of definitions. Yeah, there's an A to Z list of definitions. We couldn't possibly cover all of them, but there's one particular one I want to talk about briefly. The one is what we call additionality. Yes, additionality. Now, theoretically, I'm sure by now you're already thinking of what can I do in my community or in my company or wherever else in the country that can remove or reduce these greenhouse gases. Many people often, the default setting you always go to is tree planting. Yes, tree planting is one way in which we can say trees are able to sequester or capture or remove the carbon dioxide. That is very true. But the principle of additionality is as follows. That which you are trying to do, will it have happened on its own, or it will never have happened without intervention? I'll give an example. Today in Kenya, we know for a fact that the government of Kenya has the 15 billion trees restoration and project. So there's a government program to make sure where it was deforested is going to be reforested, and the target is 15 billion. Then you want to do a carbon project and let's say plant 1,000 trees. You might be found not to be additional because the host country government is already doing that which you're trying to do. Okay? I'll repeat. Additionality is a principle that says or asks that which you are trying to do, will it have occurred on its own, or it will never have happened without your intervention? By way of the example I've given, it's quite clear that the government already has had or has an intention of has or had an intention of doing the carbon, of doing the tree restoration. Therefore, your intervention is noble, but it might not, and I have to say might not qualify for the carbon price because it was already something that the host country government was intending to do. Okay. However, there are different ways of looking at additionality, which I'll look at later in today's session. But the principle of additionality is something that's very, very important, and we shall be talking more about that. Now, let's come to Kenya's carbon market landscape. As I've said, it's all about making sure that a particular country is able to monitor or rather work towards reducing the global temperatures by way of undertaking a climate mitigation activity. You'll notice here I'm heavy using the word mitigation and not adaptation, because mitigation, carbon markets are a mitigation activity because things have not yet gone bad, so we are trying to do course correction. That's mitigation. However, climate adaptation is whereby things have gone bad and it's just a matter of making sure the communities are able to live with it. So for example, when you're putting drainage things or building this, the gabions, for example, that's an adaptation activity. A mitigation activity, will be something totally different. So I hope that one is clear. Now, how do we know as a country what is our commitment? How much do we need to make sure we remove or reduce? I'm sure by now you have heard of things like what you call NDC, NDC being nationally determined contribution. Now, very briefly, taking back to the history. So in the 90s, when government agreed that indeed there's a problem with the atmosphere and we need to work on it, they created a market based on what you call the Kyoto Protocol, because these guys had gone to Japan, and that is where they decided the developing countries will help the developed countries in combating climate change. I won't go into the politics of why are countries in the global south doing all these things on the benefits of the global north. I won't get into that politics for now, but in principle, The Kyoto Protocol was supposed to provide a technical framework that allows countries to help each other in combating global warming. Now, it initially started to work very well. For example, here in Kenya, we had projects like the one at Kengen Olkaria's geothermal sites, for example, being part of what we call the Kyoto Protocol, or more specifically, what you call the Clean Development Mechanism, of like CDM. But it did not really work the way we were hoping. So later on in 2015, the same fellow, that is the different members or host country governments, went to the city of Love in Paris to renew their commitment towards fighting climate change, and they came up with what you call now the Paris Agreement. Now, within the Paris Agreement, one of the key things was that each country was required to just say voluntarily and willingly, what is your commitment towards fighting climate change? Now, those commitments have been clustered in two ways, what you call the unconditional contribution, which simply means we as the government of Kenya are going to reduce reduce or remove greenhouse gases by X amount voluntarily as a government without any coercion or request for money. However, they also have what you call the conditional contribution. Conditional in this case to mean we as the government of Kenya, we as the government of Tanzania will only remove X million tons of greenhouse gases if and only if we have this and that. Okay, so that's what we call the NDC. Now, this concept of NDC is very important because it provides the legal and technical basis of Kenya's carbon markets and any other country's carbon markets. Now, remember, like in the context of a supermarket, in a supermarket, let's say you've got 1,000 bottles of soda, and somebody wants you to sell them 3,000 bottles of soda. You cannot sell that which you do not have. Okay, so similarly, we shall be looking at the concept where we keep on hearing Article 6.2 projects that government of Kenya wants to sell credits to Switzerland, for example. Yes, but you cannot sell that you don't have, or you cannot sell that which you have committed and not achieved. So we shall be looking at how this NDC affects Kenya's carbon market landscape and how that is going to be captured in the carbon registry. What according to the Ministry of the Environment, Climate Change and Forestry, or what according to what we call the designated national authority, the entity that is responsible for all matters carbon in the Republic of Kenya, who happens to also be NEMA. Yes, whom all of you have interacted with NEMA. They simply said, this is how we as the government of Kenya is looking to scale Kenya's carbon market. It's going to be centered on 6 core pillars. The first one, of course, is now making sure there's clarity on matters of policy and regulation. Just like the work you're doing as environmental practitioners, you know that all the reports are anchored by, let's say, MCA, for example, and of course, the other sectoral regulations. So in the case of Kenya, the Climate Change Amendment Act was revised to make sure now things are being regularized. And then more importantly, after this particular act of parliament, there will be 4 subsidiary regulations to support it. Thankfully, 2 of them have already been gazetted. The first one, of course, was the Carbon Markets Regulation 2024. The other one is the non-market mechanism. That's to do with Article 6.8, which I'll talk about later. And then there are 2 bills, 2 smaller bills, but regulations, which are still under draft review. The third one now is what you call the National Carbon Registry regulations and National Carbon Trading regulations. So those are the 2 pending regulations, because this particular act of parliament say there will be 4 subsidiary regulations to make sure now, policy-wise, the country is in a very, very good position. Institutional coordination, we have got the designated national authority, we have got the who is of course overseeing everything, and then you have got what you call principles of making sure that projects are developed within with the community at the center. Our backstory is that this whole business of why regulations are coming into place was because there was a lot of what you call carbon cowboys and carbon cowgirls coming to Kenya, or they're from Kenya, doing carbon projects. They take all the money, leaving very little to the community. The regulations now talk about what is the minimum amount that must go to the communities, especially where you're doing a land-based project. The carbon registry is also, one of the strategy also is that the government is very keen to ensure there's a lot of innovation and diversification, and we'll be seeing what is the kind of innovation we have been able to develop within the carbon registry. There must be, of course, political leadership, and I think we can all agree that our president is one of the few presidents in the continent who is always talking about the need for us to look at carbon markets as an export commodity, for example. So there's a lot of positive political will in the government, and we'll be talking about this. And then, of course, the principle of environmental integrity. Look, we are literally in the business of transacting in air. The least we can do is to at least make sure that if so-and-so is saying they've been able to remove 1,000 tons of greenhouse gases, one must be able to ensure that that is verifiable at any point in time. So I'll pause there, and I want us to quickly have a video giving you a very good snippet of the Kenya's National Carbon Registry. Then I'll show you the platform. Then I go back to talking about the different regulations to make sure then at least now we know there's a registry, and then what are some of the regulations so far, and then we look at now the other technical bits of things in the carbon market.
Kenya has participated in carbon projects in both the voluntary carbon market and compliance market since 2009. The Kenya National Carbon Registry is a Kenya-owned national digital platform designed to catalyze Kenya's carbon markets and ensure compliance with global standards and best practice. It brings Kenya's carbon markets regulations to life through clear, governed digital processes. It supports Kenya's participation in both the voluntary carbon market and compliance pathways, including Article 6 and CORSIA, by providing an end-to-end system for registering projects, managing reviews and approvals, issuing official documents, tracking credits, and where applicable, managing transfers and corresponding adjustments. The platform is delivered through 3 portals. First, a public portal that publishes non-confidential project information and includes tools such as document verification. Second, a project developer and project proponent portal that enables proponents to follow the regulated journey, from project concept note through to credits and transfers for authorized projects. And third, an administrator portal that enables the designated national authority, DNA, to discharge its mandate through structured, time-tracked workflows, dashboards, and governance controls. Now let's take a closer look through the story of one project. Somewhere in Kenya, an organization decides to implement a carbon project based on electric cooking. They've done early groundwork, understand the opportunity, and want to register properly with the designated national authority so the project can proceed in line with Kenya's regulations. We'll call it Project X. The journey begins at the Kenya National Carbon Registry website. On the public portal, the proponent can view approved projects and access public tools like document verification. To register, they enter the secure proponent portal, create an account, verify their email, and sign in, with a one-time password adding an extra layer of protection. Next, the registry enforces integrity. Projects must be anchored to accountable organizations. Before submitting any project, the proponent completes organizational onboarding, providing organizational details, making required declarations, and uploading supporting documentation. Because the registry has been integrated with the Integrated Population Registration Service, key identity details can be validated against authoritative national records where applicable, strengthening confidence that submissions are accurate, traceable, and grounded in official data. Once the organizational details have been submitted, the DNA is notified in the administrator portal. A DNA officer reviews the submission for completeness and integrity and can approve it, send it back for correction, or reject it if requirements are not met. In this case, the organization is approved, and the proponent gains access to the full dashboard, including notifications and transaction tracking. They can now continue in onboarding the project concept note of Project X. Project onboarding is a digital representation of Schedule 1 of the regulations, the project concept note. The proponent completes a guided workflow, capturing project details, sector classification, in precise location using administrative regions in a map pin. Then proponent and ownership information, declarations, and carbon fundamentals such as expected credit volumes, baseline logic, methodology direction, and crediting period. Supporting evidence is uploaded so the submission is complete and reviewable. Then the workflow reaches a critical gate, payment. The Kenya National Carbon Registry is integrated with eCitizen, meaning fees are paid through official government payment infrastructure. The proponent selects a payment channel such as M-Pesa, completes payment, and returns to the registry. The system records the outcome, generates a receipt, assigns a reference number, and notifies the DNA that the submission is pending review. Now governance kicks in. The registry supports structured review workflows, including constitution of a multi-sectoral technical committee where required. Committee membership is captured in system, reviews are documented, decisions are traceable, and timelines are actively tracked. Submissions can be returned with clear feedback, rejected with reasons, or approved. For Project X, the outcome is positive. The registry issues a letter of no objection, a controlled system-generated document with verification safeguards, including QR-based validation through the public portal. Next comes the request for project approval. The proponent prepares and submits the project design document together with supporting documentation to demonstrate readiness and compliance. Where the project is community-based, critical social documentation is included, such as community development agreements and stakeholder documentation covering all areas the project spans. The DNA is notified and review proceeds through structured workflows and, where needed, multiple rounds. If approved, the registry issues a letter of approval as a controlled, verifiable document. From there, the project moves into implementation and monitoring. The proponent can mark the start of activities, track milestones, request extensions where necessary, and submit periodic monitoring reports. The DNA reviews reports on an evidence basis, approving, returning for additional information, or requesting corrections before progression. From there, the project moves into credit issuance. When monitoring outcomes leads to issuance, the proponent submits a credit issuance request with the required evidence, including links to relevant international crediting program documentation where applicable. Administrative fees are handled through the same integrated payment process. Once confirmed and approved, issuance is recorded and balances are updated, making market activity visible and traceable. Only then, after credits are issued, the proponent may seek authorization for participation in compliance pathways, including Article 6 and CORSIA. The request is submitted through the platform with the intended pathway clearly indicated. Decision-making is supported through governance controls such as the carbon budget and policy guardrails. Where authorization is granted under the guidance of the Cabinet Secretary, the registry issues a letter of authorization, controlled, system-generated, and verifiable. Finally, where transfers are permitted, they are initiated through structured workflows. Buyer details, pathway selection, documentation, submission, review, approval, fees, and completion. For Article 6 and CORSIA participation, corresponding adjustments are captured and tracked through defined processes, ensuring national accounting remains coherent, auditable, and aligned to Kenya's controls. That wraps up the project proponent lifecycle. The registry is built for interoperability. Through secure integration nodes and application programming interfaces, it can connect with sector registries and sector systems to reduce fragmentation while keeping governance central. The Kenya National Carbon Registry implementation was led by the National Environment Management Authority, NEMA, in collaboration with GIZ Kenya and Versed Carbon, with close coordination with the Ministry of Environment, Climate Change and Forestry, and key national stakeholders.
Thank you for that. So I'll stop sharing that and start sharing the actual portal. So as anyone who has an interest in getting into this realm can do so. I hope you can all see my screen. So please take note of the URL or the website link. It is ncr.nema. Okay. Okay, so let me go to that side. Just a minute. Just a minute. Okay. So ncr.nema.go.ke. So let's go to home. So right now, if like what was being mentioned in the portal or in the video, sorry, if you want to, if you're already an existing account user, you go to login. But for you, I'll assume you're a new person, so you need to register. And I just want to flag something also and mention that when we say the thing has been connected with the IPRS for persons of registration, it has also connected it to the register of society, register of companies. So when you put your ID here, even if you're an alien, you must be registered with of course the Ministry of Interior. So the system checks: is this person legit? Is this company legit? Is this, you know, all those things. If your company has an outstanding issue for whatever reason, the system will also flag that. So it's fully integrated. Of course, I won't go through this. It's something that's individually you can go ahead to do so. Let me go to. So right now there are no projects because none has been able to. So people are yet to start uploading their projects. Where when you click the tab showing projects, you'll be able to see where the projects are. And when we're looking at the carbon market regulations, you'll actually see what was done actually was to take the regulations and simply digitize them. In terms of the stepwise processes, we simply digitize them. So imagine a case whereby you're like trying to do an ESIA, so and then you're digitizing the process flow. That's exactly more or less what was done. And if, for example, you are an investor, you're looking to invest in a project, and so-and-so is telling you that they have gotten a letter of, let's say, no objection, letter of approval, letter of authorization, we shall look at the differences as we look at the regulations. You can simply have that, you can ask them to send you the document, put letter of no objection, then you enter the serial number, then click verify. The system will tell you that letter is a forgery. Yes, I mean, if people can forge degrees and whatnot, they can as well as forge all these things from NEMA easily, but the system now is able to block it out. So even there's something about a letter of objection. For you to get a letter of objection, for example, you need to submit the project concept note, and of course the ESIA is part of the regulation. Now the system will also check that ESIA you're submitting, is it the genuine one approved by the same NEMA, or is another work of forgery as well? So the whole point here is that there's a lot of checks and balances that have been put in place. Yeah, so there's a very detailed user guide as well that has been developed, including terms and conditions of using the registry, what are some of the basic legal items, and of course there's a contact us. And as you'll notice that this thing is anchored within NEMA, so every data collected is owned by the government of Kenya, servers and whatnot. So that is the National Carbon Registry. So for any one of you who maybe are supporting some proponents in the country in terms of carbon projects, this is where you can make sure you also start. Yes, so that's the National Carbon Registry. So let me go back now to the presentation. I hope you can see my screen. We are back to looking at the regulations. So, like I mentioned, that this National Carbon Registry is entirely anchored on the Climate Change Act, and also the Climate Change, or what you call the Carbon Markets Regulations 2024. So it is very important also as an environmental practitioner to make sure you familiarize yourself with these regulations, because this is where everything starts. Now, I want to go through all the definitions. This will be shared. The key thing I want to cover here is what we call the annual social contribution. Now, remember at the beginning I talked about the need to make sure that everyone who's doing carbon projects in the country has some sort of contribution back to Kenya's climate ecosystem. So the regulations has provided guidelines on what is the amount of annual social contributions for projects that are classified as land-based and projects that are classified as, non-land-based. So a land-based project is simply a project that's involving the use of land okay, the land ecosystem. Of course, conversely, a non-land-based project which is not entirely focused on land. So, for example, cookstove projects are non-land-based, but REDD+ projects, tree planting, afforestation are classified as land-based projects. An ongoing project is a project that has been running prior to the regulations coming into effect, and the regulation stipulates the duration within which they're allowed to regularize their affairs. A private carbon project is a non-land-based project developed by a private entity or a land-based project developed by a private entity on private land. So, if let's say you're a government agency like KenGen, and they're doing a land-based or a non-land-based project, then you are going to be classified as a public carbon project because you are what we call a public entity as per the definitions of the law. In terms of the governance structure, so within the governance structure, the who of carbon markets. And I want to reiterate something that the PS said during the launch. If you want to do a carbon project and you want to submit all these requests for whatever, there's only one office in the land you should go to. And that office is the designated national authority, DNA, who has been gazetted to be NEMA. Okay, the National Environmental Management Authority. So that the coordinator of the DNA is a madam called Dr. Anno Mambia, who now is the coordinator. Of course, she has a huge, brilliant team to support her. So in terms of framework, it's the DNA, not the PS, not the CS. Those two officers will be communicated or consulted by the DNA. But when you're doing your documentations, don't go to the PS, don't go to the CS, go to the DNA. There's also a very important office, that is the Climate Change Directorate, headed by Dr. Pacifica, and I think most of you are familiar with her. They're the ones who are looking at matters on, let's say, the NDC we covered earlier in today's call. Matters on Kenya's what you call carbon budget. How much does Kenya have to transact, to sell, etc.? That is a domain area for the Climate Change Directorate. Then, in the video, you saw that when you do these applications, when you submit your project concept note and you want to get your letter of objection, because there are different kinds of projects. There is the energy project, there's transport projects, and of course, we can't expect one person to have all this domain knowledge. So what happens is when you submit your letter or your project concept notes, a multi-sectoral technical committee shall be created, and the committee will have people with domain-specific knowledge. So, for example, if you're doing an energy project and you've submitted your project concept note, the committee will be comprised of people with an energy background. So guys from the Ministry of Energy, there's Kenya Pipeline, and so forth. So as somebody with a forest background will not be looking at an energy project. No, people with an energy background will be looking at an energy project. That way, again, we ensure that there's integrity and accountability in all these processes. And then there's also what you call the ad hoc committee. An ad hoc committee, basically, the people who are also usually set up to review what you call the project design document, the PDD. Think of the PDD like a car logbook. It is the document, it's like the project proposal document that contains everything and anything about your project. So all these committees are already been gazetted by law. There's a gazette notice saying who is in the energy committee, who's in the forest committee, and so forth. So everything is done by the law. And of course, the national registrar is the Director General of NEMA. Dr. Mamo is the national registrar. We also have what you call the sector carbon registers. For example, those with an interest in the forestry sector, what you call the REDD+. There's a REDD+ registry that has been built with the support from Conservation International, and that REDD+ register has been connected to the National Carbon Registry. So lastly and very briefly, what is the procedure of developing a carbon project to be in compliance with Kenya's climate change or carbon markets framework? Like in any project, just imagine, like in any given project, you must start with a concept note, yeah? So you must submit what you call a project concept note, or what we like to call is the PCN. And of course, there are some small fees you're supposed to pay. We shall look at that in the next slide. And the good thing, again, is that like the carbon markets, all these templates and schedules, They are provided by in the law. So if you just go to the website and look for Carbon Markets Regulation 2024, you go to the schedules, you will see the schedules provided for a concept note. So you don't have to worry too much what goes here, whether they're going here, because the template is provided. Then remember the issue about tracking time for submissions. So if you meet all the requirements of the PCN, the DNA will make sure the review and issue you with a letter of no objection, to which simply says, we as the government of Kenya have got no objection to the nature of the project you're doing for now. So proceed to develop the project, and we proceed to do what you call develop the project design document, which we shall be looking at briefly later on as well. However, if the issues with your PCN, you'll be given, you've been rejected because of this and that. And now the registry, they'll be posting those comments on your letter, and you'll be able to access it on the platform. So you don't have to travel all the way, be troubled by traffic. No. Just sit back from your platform, from your laptop. You'll see, you'll get your approval, you'll get your rejection, or whatever it is from the comfort of your laptop. You don't have to go anywhere. You don't have to call anyone. You don't have to email anyone. You can communicate anything you have in terms of reservations by the platform. But of course, you must be a user of the platform, so you must make sure you have registered. Now, if you have a letter of objection, the government is saying, proceed, develop the project, do what you call the project design document. So within 12 months of you being approved to proceed, you must make sure you have developed the project design document, and it must have been validated by a third-party auditor. I'll speak about them later before the time lapses. And the review process is very simple. The DNA will take your PDD and send it to what you call the ad hoc committee. Remember the ad hoc committee, that's on number 4 there. So the ad hoc committee will be instituted to review your PDD. And within 30 days of them receiving your PDD, they must give a feedback back to the DNA. And if everything is okay, there's no issue with the PDD, you'll be issued what you call a letter of approval. Sorry, it's not letter of rejection, so it's a letter of approval. Okay. So once you have been able to do everything as per the law, you will be given a letter of approval, which simply means now continue doing your carbon project. So let me just edit that. It's letter of approval. Sorry about that. Let me go back to sharing. So you'll get your letter of approval. Yes. Okay. Yeah. So if everything is found to be okay, your project design document, you get your letter of approval, which simply means now go ahead, do the carbon project for the entirety of its lifespan, and we'll talk about the creating period. Now, the issues of letters of authorization, like I see there's a question there on the chat box, the issues of letter of authorization. Now, remember, and we'll cover this, there are 2 kinds of carbon markets. There's the voluntary carbon market, which simply means you as a company on your own volition, you're doing this carbon project, and you're going to find ways to sell your credits. No further support needed from the government. So you will not need what you call an authorization. However, if you want to sell your credits, let's say, for example, right now Kenya is signing something with the Swiss people. Now, if you want to be able to participate in such kind of a compliance market, what you call the Article 6, what is simply replacing the CDM, or you want to participate in the other one called COSIA. COSIA stands for Carbon Offsetting and Reduction Scheme for International Aviation. This one for airlines like Kenya Airways. Just so you know, Kenya Airways, when it's flying in Europe, it has to offset, and they buy very expensive credit because the credits there are very, very expensive. Yeah, it's an expensive ecosystem. So if you want to be somebody who's, let's say, able to sell credits to an airline via COSIA, you must secure authorization from the government of Kenya. And remember, because it's a compliance market, you are only going to get an LOA, letter of authorization, if and only if you are found to be in compliance. So ukisikia ukiona mtu hajapewa hiyo barua, it's because they are not in compliance for one reason or the other. Okay, do not confuse letter of authorization with letter of approval. The letter of approval is simply saying that the project design document you did was found to be in good standing, proceed. Letter of authorization is when now you want your carbon credits to be transacted in what you call the compliance market, which is basically Article 6 or COSIA. So that is all about the regulations. Really, it is a very straightforward. Now, in terms of what are the costs, of course, there are small costs, but before the cost, there's the issue about the community development agreements. Now, ladies and gentlemen, if you are going to be supporting your client or your partner to do a land-based project in a land that is known to be community land, listen, you must do what you call a CDA, Community Development Agreement. And that CDA will be a public document on the portal. So the days where you see guys are going to some counties in you know, parts of Rift Valley, they're talking to the communities, making all these deals behind the doors, you know, or you're finding the chairman of one of the conservancies is having such arrangements. Those days are over, because now that CDA will be a public document. So if it's a work of forgery or a work of unscrupulous undertaking, those days are over. Those days are over. Now, remember the annual social contribution. So if you're doing a land-based project, 40% of the aggregate earnings of the carbon project must go to the community as described or as prescribed in the CDA. I repeat, if you're doing a land-based project or what is known to be public land or community land, yes, 40% of aggregate earnings, that means net profit, yeah, from the carbon work, yeah, strictly from the carbon credits sold, 40% of that has to go to the community by all the community development agreements. What about those who are doing non-land-based projects like cookstoves? 25% of that aggregate earning will go to what the regulation is calling the Climate Change Fund. The Climate Change Fund will be managed by the Climate Change Council that is chaired by the President, but the fund will be set up by Treasury. It has not yet happened because we don't have a Climate Change Council, and we don't have a Climate Change Council because there's an ongoing litigation in courts from the list of nominated people. So because of that, there's no council, and because there's no council, there's no climate change. So for now, projects will be required to pay that money to the DNA until things have been resolved here and there. Now, when you want to get authorization to sell credits to, let's say, Switzerland, based on the Kenya-Switzerland arrangement, for example, after you get your letter of authorization and you do the transaction, for every carbon credit sold, $4 has to go to the government of Kenya, what you call the corresponding adjustment fees, which simply means the credits you have sold will not be accounted in Kenya, but instead will be accounted in, let's say, Switzerland. So for that convenience and all that, it is $5 per credit sold, which is good money for the government to make. And what does the government do with this money? 50% of the money collected will go to the Climate Change Fund. The other 50 will remain with the DNA for what you call the administrative purposes. Think of it like the 0.1% fee you guys pay for the NEMA license and whatnot. It's for the you know, allowing them to manage things. I'll not speak too much about the fees. There's a fee for you to submit a project concept note. If you're Kenyan, it's 10,000 shillings. If you're non-Kenyan, 100,000. Pretty straightforward. When it comes to now getting the project design PDD, project design documents being accepted, there's a fee of 100,000 if you're Kenyan. There's a fee of 200,000 if you're not Kenyan. Now, when your project is starting to generate credits, you must give something to the government of Kenya. So, if your carbon credits per annum is generated at less than 15,000 carbon credits per annum, you'll be required to pay the DNA 150,000 shillings. If you're generating more than 15,000 credits per annum, you'll be required to pay 300,000 Kenya shillings. Okay, that's an administrative fee. Now, once the credits have been issued, if you have selected the option that you're getting less than 15,000 credits, then for every carbon credit that has been issued to you, you must pay the government, the DNA, $0.1 per carbon credits issued. And if you said you are generating more than 15,000 credits per annum, then for every carbon credit issued to you, you must pay the DNA $0.2 per every carbon credit. And now for those who are looking at The Article 6, it's $4 for every carbon credit that has been sold via the compliance mechanism. You might be wondering where and how do we get these methodologies and whatnot. Now, one thing I want to mention is this. The Kenya National Carbon Registry currently does not have methodologies that will be used. So what the regulation says is this. You can use an internationally accepted crediting program, like the ones we're going to be talking about right now, to develop the projects and make sure those documents like the PDD will also be ratified here in Kenya's regulations. Now, I talked about the compliance market and the voluntary. I will not talk about much about the compliance market. I think that was pretty clear for now. So for the voluntary market, there are quite a number of what we call international crediting programs. On your screen to the left-hand side, you can see there's the one for the UN, UNFCCC, United Nations Framework for Climate Change Convention. You can use the methodologies like Kenyan. Back in the CDM era, they used the methodologies from the UNFCCC to do the geothermal carbon projects. One of the most popular ones in Africa and also Kenya is called Vera. Another one is called the Gold Standard. They're very robust. They've got so many methodologies and so many things. Then the one for Plan Vivo. Those of you are familiar with the mangrove projects in Kwale called Mikoko Pamoja, they're using Plan Vivo. In fact, that project was the first mangrove carbon projects in the world. And these other ones, they're not very common in the continent or even Kenya, so mostly we're dealing with CDM, Vera, Gold Standard, Plan Vivo. The image on your right shows the different types of carbon projects. It's not just about Ujazamiti. No, there are so many projects. If you've ever seen a cook stove in your household, those are carbon projects. If you've ever seen about the digester, that is a potential carbon project. Wind turbines. We can talk about reducing methane from rice cultivation. Yes, you can get carbon credit from that. This bus in Nairobi called the Basigo, that's a carbon project as well. Yeah, if the Nairobi County government decides to put the 45 megawatts waste to energy plant, it will also be a carbon project. I'm sure I've seen people providing safe drinking water in Kenya. Those could be a potential carbon project. There are over 170 different types of carbon projects. Okay, and I'll show you some quick examples. There's one project we're doing with the government of Kenya, helping schools transition. That is going to be a carbon project in the Gold Standard. Voucher, I'm sure some of you have heard of what you call voucher. You're taking agricultural waste, converting it to something that can be put into the soil after playing around with it. That's also a carbon project. I'm sure most of you have heard of agroforestry, where you're planting trees between the crops that you're rearing. That is also a carbon project. We're doing some of this in northern Uganda as well. I'm sure most of you have seen biodigesters all over the place. That can also be a potential carbon project for whoever is doing it. I'm sure most of you have also heard of black soldier fly, BSF. Yes, that is also a carbon project because, or it can be a carbon project because you're avoiding methane from being released by using insects to undertake aerobic composting. Yeah, there's one such project registered in Tanzania as well. Rice cultivation. Most of us remember when you were in school growing up, we were hearing for you to grow rice, flood the field and let it grow. But then what you notice is when you flood the field, there's some smell. That smell is methane. How did the methane get there? When you flood the field, you're creating a low oxygen environment, anaerobic. So things there inside die, and then the methane is being released. So what you do is what you call alternate wetting and drying, yeah, to reduce the amount of methane. It's already being practiced in Moya through the National Irrigation Authority, but they're not yet just crop out the competition. So there are so many different projects. And to be clear, the first one of the earliest projects in the country in Kenya was the one for the forestry, the Red Plus project in Chulu, as far back as the early 2000s. Yeah, so this is not anything. This is not new. That's been there for like 2-3 decades. Now, like in any market, there are different players, and I want to talk about these different players in what you call the carbon project cycle. So allow me to just quickly run there to show you the cycle before I then bring the session to a pause for at least for today. I welcome in Q&A. You might be wondering, what is the process of registering what is the stepwise process for you to develop a climate project? Now, there are about 8 steps, not 9. The 9 one, it's for the buyers. the 8 steps. So the 8 steps to developing this project, the first one, like in any business, like in any project, is the feasibility assessment. Yeah, you must go to the ground and see, is this thing technically and economically viable? Yeah, so that is the same thing with the carbon markets. Remember the project design, the PDD we talked about. Before you start putting together things into what you call the project design document template, you must ask yourself, how am I really going to design this project? I'll give an example of one project you're trying to design. It's on electric cooking, giving households electric pressure cookers to use as opposed to, let's say, paraffin or whatever. So we have to make sure that if you're going to transition a household, let's say based in further estates, that let's say they're initially using paraffin or firewood or charcoal, we have to ask ourselves, how can we incentivize such a household? So in part of our design, we are saying 20% of the carbon credits being generated from the household will be given back to them as well by way of electricity tokens. So that's what's called project design. You're thinking through, how are you going to make sure this project is going to be sustainable and incentivize the communities, for example. And of course, there at that stage, you have to look for money. How are you going to get the money for doing your project? Because the government of Kenya is not going to give you. You have to do resource mobilization. Then you have to make sure the project is anchored under a particular carbon methodology. How are we going to do the carbon accounting for removing the greenhouse gases? US environmental practitioners, I'm sure you're familiar with the ISO standards, yeah? So the ISO standard that usually governs carbon methodology, carbon work, is ISO 14064, part 2, yeah? Part 1, as you know, is for the scope 1, scope 2, scope 3. Part 2 is now for climate mitigation. This is what we're talking about. Part 3 is for the validators. We'll talk about in section 4. So you then design your project design documents. Then an independent auditor has to come and validate that your project design is as per the methodology of a particular standard, be it from Vera or Gold Standard, whoever it is. If everything is found to be okay, and of course, assuming you did the local stakeholder consultation when you're doing your project design, local stakeholder consultation, think of it like public participation as per the Kenyan lingo. And this one, before you have the public participation, you must notify the communities 30 days prior. 30 days prior. Not 2 days, not 3 days, 30 days. Yeah, and so forth. So if everything is found to be okay, the project will be registered by the standard, step number 5. Now remember, one question you might be having in your mind, where do you start? The Kenya regulations or the international carbon standards? I'll say they'll be running in parallel because the carbon standards will require you to give them the letter of no objection before step number 5 is complete. And remember, at step number 4, you're going to go to what you call the validated PDD. And if you remember in the regulations, you're supposed to also give them the PDD. So get the PDD validated with, let's say, Vera or the Gold Standard scenario. Then, as you push it to stage number 5, take your PDD to the DNA, NEMA, and have them give you the letter of approval. So as when the carbon registry is asking you about the letter of approval in step number 5, you have a letter of no objection, you have a letter of approval, you have your ESIA, you are in good standing. Then we come to now the step, now that you've been registered, you said you're going to plant 1 billion trees. Very good. Now walk the talk. There's something we call crediting period, because you might be wondering, for how long can you do a carbon project? Now, depending on which standard you pick, we call it crediting period, the duration of which you're allowed to get carbon credits. If you're doing your project with, let's say, Vera standard, you'll be allowed to do the carbon project for the next 7 years, renewable twice. That means you do it between 7 and 21 years. If you're doing it with the Gold Standard, you'll be doing it for 5 years, renewable twice. So that means up to potentially 15 years. So in stage number 6, you start implementing your projects in your first crediting period. Let's say within every 2 years, you must have your data verified. So bring in a third-party auditor to verify that you implemented the project and monitored the project as per the methodology. So you move from number 6 to number 7. Let's say after 2 years of registration, you go to stage number 7 on your screen. So if you are doing with Vera, it means in the first crediting period of 7 years, you had the first verification in year 3. So at the end of year 2, which then means you'll get credits issued for those 2 years, step number 8. And because you still have 5 more years, you'll move from step number 8 back to step number 6. You'll be looping 6 to 8, 8 to 6, until you exhaust your crediting period. Step number 9 is for the people who will be buying your credits. So allow me to stop there for now. This will be shared. I'll just close by saying, I'm sure you're wondering, what are the price for these credits? Now, the prices can be as little as $3. It can be as much as $1,000. It all depends on the number of factors. How have you designed your project? Are you doing a removal? Are you doing a reduction? For example, clean cooking is reduction. Reduction is not as permanent as a removal. So someone who's doing vouchers, you can see the voucher is between $80 and $400. That I think you've heard of these companies called who are capturing air in the Rift Valley. Yes, I think you've heard of them. When they're selling their credits, it's between $1,000 and $3,000 per credits. Those who are doing, let's say, let me see, cook stoves, average price last year was about $15. So it really all depends with what it is that you are doing. For those of you who want to see which projects so far are running in the country of Kenya, in let's say the Vera standard, I will show my screen one last time. So remember I talked about the gold standard. So if you want to see the projects in Kenya, go to the gold standard registry, as you can see on my screen. Let me also show the one for Vera, and I'll show you how to look for these projects in Kenya. Very easy. There's a lot of transparency in this business of ours. I'll tell you that. You cannot do a project. So let's say, for example, right now, and maybe somebody can tell me which kind of projects they want to see. I go to Vera. Vera is registry.vera.org, and then let me put this there. So I want to see which projects are in Kenya. I come here, I filter Kenya, I scroll down to Kenya here. Okay. Please mute. I click there Kenya, and let's say I want to see which projects are registered in Kenya. So status, registered with Vera, okay? Registered with Vera. I click there, registered. I search, and then let's say I want to see which projects are registered in Kenya and the type. Let's say there are those in agriculture. I click agriculture, I search. I'm sure some of you have heard of a project called like Victoria Watershed, another is called Bumitra, another is called Western Kenya Soil Carbon, and so forth, Mount Kenya Regenerative Agriculture. So let's say I want to learn about Mount Kenya Regenerative Agriculture. You click that blue link. When you click it, it will come to this page. This page will show you who is the developer, etc. And more importantly, remember the document I told you is called PDD. You can see it's labeled here as PD. When you see PD, it just does the PDD. If you want to know who and where they're doing it, you click that link again. It's going to download. You open it. You will see even the phone number and the email addresses of the people doing it, because as I've mentioned, everything is publicly disclosed except for matters of finance. So if you want to look at the location, where was the project done, how they're doing it, and all those stories, all these things are publicly available. So the idea now is Kenya's National Carbon Registry will be what we call a mirror of what is there in this international carbon standard. Because right now, we do not have a single place that's a registry that shows projects in Kenya from Vera, Gold Standard, etc. One has to come to these individual places to look. So I know there's a lot more to cover, but I can notice that also we have to have some time for Q&A, and I'm sure we can always organize another session to just look at the nitty-gritties. Yes.
Thank you very much for the insightful presentation. We will take 3 questions per batch, Then you respond, then we move to the next batch. The first question is, taking example of Cocoa Network, whose business model was built around sale of carbon credits, but had to sadly shut down because of the inability to sell the credits. Were they ahead of a legislative framework, hence difficulty in getting government approvals? What should other businesses learn from these before executing their plans? The second question, foreign organization which is not registered in Kenya apply to implement a carbon project. If it can't, what options are available? Then the third question is, where do we lodge complaints on a proponent who is not transparent on methodology and type of carbon credits they are trading?
I'll start the last coming to the first question, which is a bit more interesting. So where do you lodge complaints on a proponent who's not transparent? So one of the key critical steps on a carbon project is what you call the local stakeholder consultation. You must convene people, and you do. So there are two ways you can lodge a complaint. One is with the DNA, okay? Because the project must receive recognition in Kenya, so you can always lodge the complaint there and within the platform that is provided. The second place is now with, let's say, Vera or the gold standard. When a project claims that it did a local stakeholder consultation, the carbon registry, let's say Vera gold standard, will take the what you call the local stakeholder consultation report and put on the website, and then they will broadcast to the rest of the world that here you all, Lotum is trying to do a project in Nairobi. People have an objection. Now is the time to object to it. Now, people will make all their comments. Some comments will be positive, some comments will be negative. Now, for any negative comment raised, the registry will make a point, this is Vera or gold standard, to investigate and know whether or not there's any truth behind it. If there's a truth behind it, the proponent will be told there's this issue and they found the issue to be true, it must correct. So those are two levels that one can raise issue on. Question on a foreign entity not yet registered, yes. Regulation allows for that for non-foreign entities now, but at some point in time, they'll still be required to have some sort of localization, because one of the key things that has been happening is what we call transfer pricing. Transfer pricing is whereby you are doing business in Kenya, but you're declaring your profits, elsewhere, then saying you've always been making losses, yet you're still alive and whatnot. So those are tax issues, but I think you understand me. What I'm trying to hear is say in terms of ultimately you will have to be in compliance. Now, to the first question about the company that has been having problems, allow me to comment in this way. 3 comments. And this is my personal opinion as a developer. You cannot start something saying, I'm starting a carbon business. If, for example, I'll give the example of Basigo. Basigo have started the business of ferrying people from one place to another, like any other matatu business. So, by design, they have to make sure the business of ferrying people from Kangware to the CBD is viable. The carbon credits, the carbon finance should only come in to allow you to either be comfortable in your earnings or even expand your business or subsidize the cost of some of these products. But ideally, remember the feasibility study, you should make sure that that mitigation activity you're doing can at least be viable even without carbon, because the price of carbon goes up and down over the last couple of years. So it's always advisable to make sure you have a solid business. Now, remember, it's not that somebody is unable to sell. Remember, I said there are 2 markets. There's a voluntary carbon market, there's a compliance market. The problem with the voluntary carbon market is, for example, where cookstop credits in the compliance market could be sold for $25. With the compliance market, it could be $8, $4, $10. So the VCM, the price is not so good. But nothing stops you from still selling in the voluntary carbon market. The only issue is you will not make as much money as you want to make. But if you're coming to the compliance market, you have to be in compliance with the requirements. Okay, so if the government says you need to do this and that in your calculations, blah, 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 if you're not in compliance, think of it like the EIA. You have done your report, but there's some advanced issues found, and you're told, if you're on the license, ile drainage from your factories draining money, sewage into the river, you have to correct it. So if the government denies giving you an EA license because you're not in compliance with MCA, you have to be in compliance with MCA for you to get your so-called license. So compliance markets requires you to be in full compliance with the guidelines and regulations. So it's not a question of being ahead of time or not, because those things have always been happening. Companies have been getting some sort of alloys from the past. So it's not really regulations not being in compliance, because these things have been happening. Like I've said, the carbon markets has been there for the last three decades. So yes, yeah. Next.
Thank you, Mr. Charles. We have another question from Lengunye, who says, when is NEMA starting using the digital platform, and how can project proponent continue with projects which are underway, like they have obtained letter of no objection? That is the first question. And Ansieta Mololo, I can see your hand is up. Please unmute and ask your question. And then Mr. Charles will respond to those two, then we proceed to the next ones.
Yes, thank you, Titus. Thank you, Charles, for the wonderful presentation. It's quite informative. My question is on organizations that do not have green projects as their main business. Let's say, for example, a manufacturing company or a bank. As part of sustainability or corporate sustainability, there are projects that those organizations undertake. For example, land restoration projects. There is also recycling of waste and other green projects, or even offering green loans, supporting clients in getting biodigesters, doing agroforestry. So can those organizations register with KNCR, and how can they benefit from the carbon markets? Thank you.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, the third one, yes.
Yeah. My name is Mutombe, a lecturer at the University of Nairobi, and I have a question, Charles. If you have a plantation of avocado trees or tea or coffee, are you able to register for carbon trading? Thank you.
Thanks. So the first question on when things will the platform be ready. So right now, the DNA is piloting with some few handful of projects, but they mentioned that during the launch that they'll do a proper public announcement on when can you start uploading, and also for those with a letter of no objection, what will be the next step. But ideally, what is going to happen is you'll just be required to register your account and then just go through, because you already know you have a letter of no objection, and then to just make sure everything is just regularized. But key to note is that they said they're going to do an announcement, an official announcement for them now to do a formal call for applications for everyone, and they'll also give guidance for that for those ones with a letter of no objection and letter of approvals. How will you be handled? The platform is already designed to handle such scenarios. Question 2 on the people who are doing some sort of financing and whatnot. I'll say this: a project proponent is the person who owns the carbon credits. The owner of the carbon credits is the owner of the carbon assets by way of not mere physical ownership, but intellectual property. So for example, in the case of a cook stove, you'll find that in most cases, it is these companies that own the carbon credits, because the carbon credits have been issued to the stove because the stove has an intellectual property of thermal efficiency that allows to reduce the emissions. So just because you finance, does not automatically give you the rights. The principal owner is the owner of that carbon asset in terms of the intellectual property. So if you're a financier, not unless it's a part of the financing agreements, you cannot register that project. I like to use the example also for people who are distributing these pressure cookers on behalf of the manufacturers from wherever. They have zero rights to those carbon credits, zero. Not unless the manufacturer explicitly gave them a letter waiving those rights. In the case of a land, the case of a piece of land, let's say Charles owns 1,000 acres of land, but he's not planting trees, but instead, Anne comes and says, I want to lease your land to plant trees. Then, by way of that agreement, the credit will go to Anne because she has a legitimate lease to the land. I hope this is clear. A proper opponent must be somebody with a legitimate rights and ownership to those carbon credits, because those things will be asked, especially for things like cookstop projects. Usually, the carbon registries, they tend to ask you, are you the manufacturer? You say no. Then you must give us the waiver from the manufacturer. And their own way of doing the due diligence, because the last thing we want is 1,000 hectares of forestry cover is being claimed by multiple people. We call that you call that what you call double claiming. So that one is going to be, that is not going to be a piece. And then lastly, on the question of, you mentioned avocado trees, tea and coffee. So one thing is this: if you're simply doing a coffee plantation or tea plantation, you will not get any carbon credits, because most likely your tea and coffee bush are there over 10, 20 years of age. So it has already been happening and you have never needed any kind of support, so there's no claim. However, if you start doing the shade trees, you can make a claim for the shade trees. Now, avocado is one such tree that can give you carbon credits. However, the question will be as follows. One, when did you start the project? Yeah, I've been doing this for 10 years. Very good. You are very honest, but your honesty will kill you in this way. If you have been doing a mitigation project for more than 2 years without having the project registered, you will be deemed not to be additional, because if you have been doing it for 3, 5 years, you keep doing it, we don't need the money. Why do you need the carbon? Because you've been doing it for 3, 5, 10 years. Everything's going to be okay. That's not the principle of additionality. There are different ways we look at additionality. We're looking at investment analysis, for example. For example, the investment analysis, the question would be, what is the internal rate of return, IRR, with carbon and without carbon? Then if your percentage is below the benchmark for the industry, for example, in renewable energy is 13%, and without carbon, your IRR is, let's say, 10%, but with carbon, your IRR is 20%, then you'll be found to be additional by what investment analysis. But this other one, you've been doing something very well for 5, 10, 20 years, you keep doing that. There's no need for carbon because everything's okay. Not unless you can present as a very good justifiable scenario why you still need the money. I like to use the example of what's a very sensitive example, the case of, let's say, Mau Forest. We know Mau Forest is a natural forest. And now today you want to go get carbon credits as a government. The first answer will be no. However, if you're able to show a specific portion of Mau Forest that was deforested or degraded, then you can talk about reclaiming it and getting credits for just that small portion. So yes, Mr. Mudumbi, you can get credits from agroforestry, that's what's called agroforestry, but not for the tea. But if the agroforestry shade trees has been on your tea farm for more than 2-3 years, then you might not be found to be additional because you've already been doing it. So unless you can present a case of maybe there was a forest fire or you're expanding, something of the sort. So yeah, sometimes we must be honest, but sometimes the honesty has a detrimental impact on our eligibility. But that is the case. Our bottom is clear.
We have a follow-up question from Lengunye, who says, if I am working with private landowners, approximately 1,000 participants, to develop a carbon project, would this require community development agreement? As you said during the presentation, Peter Kihunyu is asking for example projects in biogas. Maybe that's something you can share briefly. And then the last one from Job Herbert, who says, is it possible for public water utilities to access credits from sewer treatment? And the last one, I'll go for 4 this time, from Patrick Otieno. How will greenwashing be verified and avoided from the credit projects? We can answer those, then we do the final round. Thank you.
Yes, so the question about the community development agreements, if you get 1,000 people to do an afforestation project on public land, yes, you need the CDA because the land is public. But if it's on private, no. If it's on private land, you don't need the CDA, it's your private land, and you don't need to pay the 40% to the community because the community is you, it's your private land. Our button is clear. Yeah, our button is clear on the CDA, but to be very clear, if you're doing it on public land and the community or whatever is a CDA, you need to do a CDA. Now, and I hope you all know the definition of a community. So let's say you're doing a project and there are 4 communities in that land, in that county. Those are 4 communities, those are 4 CDAs. As per the definition of a community in the regulation. Biogas, yes, you can do biogas project. There is actually one such project that is registered in Kenya and is requesting for a letter of authorization. Yeah, so biodigesters, either it's going for the household or schools, yes, biodigesters get you credits. And the good thing about biodigestor projects, it is a methane reduction. That means for every 1 kilogram of methane removed, you have removed 29 kilograms. So it's a very, very good project. Question about public water companies getting credits from the sewage. Yes, yes. What you call fecal sewage treatment, whatever. That is also what you call methane avoidance or methane reduction. Yes, there are such projects. In Africa, very few, most of them are in China, but yes, it is eligible. There's a methodology, you can get your credits. And also, again, it is methane avoidance and methane reduction. That means very good batch of credits. Greenwashing, there are various ways of preventing greenwashing. So one is making sure there's a very robust verifiability, very robust mechanism of assessing these claims. Yeah, so yes, we can prevent that, but at the end of the day, really, there's a number of issues in carbon markets that different people are trying to think of it to see how to prevent. So imagine you are a company involved in trafficking of arms or these bad businesses, and there's your footprints. Like, let's say you're a company engaged in the oil and gas sector, and then you're coming to buy carbon credits to offset. Yeah, it's okay, but ethically there's a problem with that. There are issues or fears of money laundering in carbon markets as well. For example, where a credit could be sold for $20. Somebody tells you I'll buy at $100, you wash and we share. you get. So there are those issues, and the different ecosystems are trying to see how to have more visibility on them. But yes, that has always been an issue. Different companies, different regions, especially those in the global north, are looking for ways to contain those problems. But yes, those problems are real, and they're not going away anytime soon. That one I can assure you. So, for example, people have been asking, why do we have carbon markets where we are allowing people to keep on polluting and so long as they can offset? Yet we should be telling companies to change, stop using diesels, start using solar, for example. The harsh reality is that people made investments to have those diesel things, and they're not willing to let go of the investment. That's the harsh reality. So that's why most of the global north countries, they don't force people to do insetting, they allow them to do what you call the offsetting. So that is some of the challenges of the carbon markets that it's still prolonging the problem. Yeah. Next.
Thank you once again, Mr. Charles. We have a question from Godino Mwasaru, who is asking, who determines whether locals are getting competitive and fair pricing? Then we have another from Anthony Munywa. How do you differentiate between project proponents, that is developer, and project proprietor for an agroforest carbon project which has a foreign organization which develops the framework, a local entity which onboards farmers, and the small scale farmers who own the land? Then Joka Joseph is requesting to know, if I want to start a methane reduction project in Mwea rice scheme, can I get a no objection?
Thank you. So on the who determines the price, if the local are getting competitive price, so this really comes down to the agreements you're forming. So what has been happening is guys, they come, they get communities to sign off land or whatever, They do the projects, they go sell the credits to the people, and they don't come to disclose. Like I'll give an example of a project that was cancelled in Zimbabwe, Kariba. What happened is that guys were telling the local forest rangers they sold credits for like $2, yet they're selling it for over $30, for example. So what now Kenya is trying to do is to have more and more disclosures. So within your CBA for the communities, they have to put clauses on utmost good faith and on 100% disclosures on the price. Okay, so that is how the regulation is trying to help communities tighten. Now, one thing I also have to say is the prices of this carbon credits, they fluctuate. It's like a commodities. It's like the NSC. Today, the shares of Safaricom is this amount. Because of somebody sneezing, it's now that amount. So they go up, down. Like now, we know that Trump, the US is pulling away from the CCC. It's definitely going to have a sort of impact. And maybe now American companies like Netflix, who usually buy credits here, might feel otherwise about the price. I don't know. Yeah, so we're waiting to see, given something that just declared last month. So there could be impact. So prices of carbon credits, it's fluctuating, but how communities can know is within the community development agreement, they must put those clauses of disclosures and whatnot. Difference between a project proponent, stock developer, and a proprietor for agroforestry carbon projects, the foreign organization, and is very simple. Number one, the foreign organization does not own the land, most likely, I'm assuming. So most likely they're going to want to do what you call lease from the local company. So when you lease somebody their land, it's simply you're telling them, wewe fanya utakavyo unilipe haki yangu, si ndio? So when you lease that land to this foreign company or even local company, the credits belongs to you. And the carbon registry will ask you for the lease to show you own the land. So you can show you own the land either by the title deed ownership, there's this other one called allotment letters, and now this lease agreement. So that is the scenario. So once you give a lease as a community, then you should know that's where your rights ended because you have leased off the land. So most of the frameworks will be, these guys will tell the farmers who own their own land, for every tree you're planting, I'll give you X shillings every given month. The number of projects in the country actually, that's how they're designed. They don't lease the land, they just get the farmers, tell the farmers, I want you to plant this number of trees in your 1 acre of land every year for the next 20, 30 years. And I'll be giving you this and that much. So that's another approach that is there. And about where you ask, your question is, if I want to start a methane reduction project in Mwea rice scheme, can I get an objection? Remember, for you to get a letter of no objection, you need to submit what you call the project concept note. And I think it's in clause 13, the PCN will require you to also submit an ESIA. So the answer is yes, you can get a letter of no objection so long as you're in compliance with the regulation. Yes. And of course, the issue about whether you own the land etc., that one you have to sort it as well. But yes, anyone can get a letter of no objection so long as, again, you're in compliance with the law. It's the same way anyone can get an EIA license, right? So long as you're in compliance with MCA, for example. Yes, the question from the audience.
And I wanted first was around additionalities. I wanted to know from the presenter how that should be defined, either in form of technology. Say, for example, I come up with a technology that is able to save, say, for example, fuel consumption. So, for example, charcoal consumption, say, for example, by enhancing energy efficiency or something like that. Can that be considered as additionality? Or can additionality only be defined in form of funding because there wasn't funding intervention, therefore I'm bringing in this funding so that many people can then enjoy that transition. Secondly was around the costs. I saw a lot of costs around this project, from fees that are being paid to the government, fee being paid to the community and all that. So the question ahead was around whether this, with all those fees, associated costs, even to the validate, so the person who's going to validate the methodology and whether that methodology is being followed through, whether with all that, the project still is able to be viable and generate revenue for the owner. Yeah.
Okay, so to the last question first about viability, I'll be honest with you. It's very rare to see carbon project development companies or projects come to foreclosure, as in to be bankrupt. Yeah, let me use that bankrupt. It's not easy. I can tell you this for free. One, when you do a feasibility study, that's where you know you should get your numbers right. Yeah. For example, today if you came to me and say, I want to plant 50 trees and get carbon, I'll say you may or may not. You may not get directly if you're just doing a project of 50 trees because the potential you generate is not enough to cover the costs. However, like what you do in agroforestry in northern Uganda, we aggregate small farmers together. So if your project is too small, aggregate, so as you can level what you call the economies of scale. But if your project is too small by its own, then forget about it. But I can tell you this for free. The cost put in the regulation for what you call a small scale project, a small scale project is a project that can generate between 10,000 and 60,000 credits. So imagine a project generating, let's say, 20,000 credits in clean cooking, right? If they sell each credit, 20,000 credits, 20,000 GHG removals per annum for, let's say, 5 years, okay? If they sell every credit for just $5 every year, 20,000 credits sold at $5 each year, that is $100,000. Yes, there's some small fees for government of Kenya, but if there'll be no requirement for a letter of authorization, that means they only pay the fee of $0.15 per credit, plus 100,000 here and the other 15,000 there. The 10,000 for PCN, 100,000 for the PTD, and then for issuance will be $0.2 per credit. If you did the math right and you did your process right, you'll still be left with quite a bit. So it's about scale. Yeah, everything's about scale. For example, you go to the EPZ factories in the river, you tell them, nipatie hesabu ya kutengeneza shati ya 50. No, it's too expensive for them to do that. But tell them, give me a sample for 50,000 shirts. Now you're talking business. So it's always about comes down to scale. So I'll tell you again, those costs given there were pretty well calculated given the scale of projects in the country, and also if you do your numbers right, you may still be able to get. Now about additionality, thank you for that. I know additionality is a tricky one, so allow me to go back to sharing my screen again. So remember I mentioned that there are different ways of showing additionality. Now, one thing is this: every methodology for every carbon standard will tell you how to address additionality for that specific project type. But broadly, the 4 types of tests we do. And when I say test, it means we document using the tools that are given to us. So the first one is what we call the legal and regulatory tests. Okay? If there's a regulation that is already prohibiting something, then you might not be found to be additional. I want to give the example of mangroves. There's a regulation prohibiting the cutting down of mangroves. But why is it then that in 2013, a company were allowed to register the mangrove carbon project in Kwale? The reason was they were still able to show that despite there being a regulation, there was still systematic deforestation of the mangroves, and they were able to show a scientific journal paper to prove that. So now, for example, in the 15 billion trees, we know that the government has a program to restore tree covers across 47 counties. But if you come and say that in my sub-county in Kajiado, it's not happening because of deforestation, and there's documentary evidence for that, you can overcome that additionality. The second test, if you fail test 1, let's say you're still not able to prove test 1. Test 2 is investment and financial feasibility test. Then I mentioned about the issue of the IRR, I want to reiterate. But still, even if you fail that, the question then is, you have the third option, common practice. If let's say, like you're saying about a technology for clean cooking, you can say that, for example, the common practice of people to cook in that area is by way of LPG. And then you are trying to introduce, let's say, a Bama stove. You'll be told it's not possible because the common practice itself is showing reduction of emissions reduction, and therefore you're using a lesser technology. However, in your case, you can talk about number 4, the barrier analysis. You can say that it is technologically difficult for you to deploy this tool because the cost for technology is too high. I'll give you the example of the direct air capture machines that are able to remove this dirty air from the atmosphere. Those machines are very, very expensive. So for them, even if they will not pass number 1, 2, 3, they can easily pass the barrier analysis and say, because there's a technological barrier to get people to do what I'm trying to ask them to do. Safe drinking water, for example, the argument with safe drinking water is people use firewood to boil water in the rural areas. So I want to give them this AquaGuard, I want to give them this reverse osmosis machine, but that technology is too expensive, for example. Okay, so additionality can be proven in different ways, such that even if you fail one test, you still have other tests you could possibly prove. So I don't know if I've responded to your question, but additionality, it is one on regulation, money, etc. So there are different ways for us to examine it. So my advice always be, identify the specific thing you're trying to do. 1, identify the carbon registry you're going to be doing it with, this is Vera or gold standard. Then identify the methodology. Within that methodology, they'll tell you the order of these tests. Some of them, for example, they start with investment, some of them start with common practice. So it will tell you which test to start with, and then you follow suit. Any more?
Mr. Charles, thank you for the response. Members, colleagues, that response marks the end of our Q&A session. I can see there are so many questions and a lot of interest in this topic, but we all agree that it is an interesting topic. We need to have more similar engagements to ensure that all our questions, our concerns are addressed. As we conclude, Mr. Charles, I want to sincerely thank you for this informative presentation and for guiding us clearly through the session. To members of EIK, thank you once again for your active participation. I am sure we have a team here who are yet to join the Environment Institute of Kenya, and maybe you are interested in becoming part of our growing community of environmental professionals. We warmly welcome you to do so. I've seen a lot of questions on how we can have a WhatsApp group to engage and to continue this conversation. Yes, we have technical working groups at EIK, and these technical working groups are based on your specialization. We have specifically the climate change technical working group. If you register to join as a member, you will be added in that WhatsApp group and you will be able to engage with your fellow professionals. The membership link will be shared in the chat shortly for you to follow up and consider joining the Institute. With this marking the end of our Q&A session, once again, thank you so much, Mr. Charles. And I'll now invite our PEP, Partnership Education and Communication Convener, who serves as our training coordinator, to give the final remarks. Karibu sana, Daktari.
Thanks, CEO, and I really appreciate that this has gone well. Charles, asante sana. You have really over-delivered as usual, and most of us like your natural tone, and I like the way you even get to Kiswahili when you think we are not getting it well. So you did it, and this one was great. So I think going forward, we will be organizing a training specifically on carbon markets, and I think Charles Wawero will be featuring much. I don't want us to just have a very generic knowledge of what he's talking about. So we'll be organizing a very comprehensive training on carbon markets that will break down everything that Charles is talking about. And we will start all the way from the basics of the Article 6.2. And I think that will do us a lot of good, so that then we are not just attending trainings and attending more trainings but we are never having a glimpse on it. So just be on the lookout for that. It will be intensive, but it will be very, very targeted only on matters carbon markets. Thank you so much, Charles. And over to you, CEO.
Thank you, Daktari.